India will fast track visas for Chinese technicians to address delays in manufacturing units worth billions of dollars. To discuss this, we have Ravi Krishnaswamy from Frost and Sullivan and Naina Bardwaj from Desan Shira and Associates. Now let's begin the discussion with the changes in the Indian manufacturing industry. What's causing the delay? Starting with Ravi.
So when you look at Indian manufacturing sector, the delays can be attributed to several reasons, like the global supply chain issues, domestic supply chain fragmentation, logistics bottlenecks, inconsistent implementation of the government initiatives like, say, Make in India or production-linked incentives across different states, raw material shortages, price escalation. But finally, I would say, especially relating to your question, I think clearly labor shortages, both domestic due to induced migration after COVID, rather COVID-induced migration, I would say, skills gap in the market, and more importantly, I would say, delay in visas for Chinese technicians. I think that's kind of, a lot of these are getting together to impact the Indian manufacturing sector. So what's happened is, since 2020, both because of COVID and also some border skirmishes, we've seen the Indian government delay visas. There were more scrutiny. And I think one report says that I think because of the, I would say, non-availability of Chinese technicians, the production losses for the period 2020 to 24 fiscal year has kind of amounted to about $15 billion US. This also impacts the manufacturer's revenue, of course, but also the country's export commitments and the government tax collection. And many of the manufacturers impacted are some of the large conglomerates in India. So they are clearly applying pressure on the Indian government to accelerate the visa approval. And recently, we have seen Indian government officials and ministers saying that I think they will kind of accelerate visa, not just for China, but for any country, which is going to kind of address these issues.
So we have to understand the special relationship between India and China, and the fact that despite the many restrictions that the Indian government has been trying to impose to reduce its economic dependence, it's still heavily reliant on Chinese imports, especially when it comes to capital good equipment and high precision machinery. So in order to use that particular machinery, Indian manufacturers rely on the expertise of Chinese technicians who, because of the border standoff, have not been granted visa approvals in the past couple of years. So just to put a statistic here, in 2019, we granted approvals for over 2 lakh Chinese nationals, and this number was reduced to just merely 2,000 by 2024. So in order to fast track, in order to call these Chinese technicians to come to India, install the necessary machinery, or maybe undertake repairs and train the local workforce, we require to streamline the process so that the visas are fast tracked.
And how will this affect India-China trade relations? Naina?
So again, this is a double-edged sword. I believe that granting approvals to the Chinese nationals will definitely open a channel for communication. It might reduce the tensions that have been building up for the past couple of years, but at the same time, I believe this will also expose India's dependence to the Chinese. And the very dream that India has been, dreaming of making India the global manufacturing hub, fulfilling that particular, dream, it has to start by, training its workforce. It has to start somewhere, and that has to ultimately come through Chinese expertise.
As India grows its manufacturing sector, it is pertinent, or it's kind of clear that they are depending more and more on the Chinese imports, at least in terms of raw materials and some semi-finished goods. Plus, of course, the machinery we talked about earlier. And in general, I think while India started off to be a location of choice for China plus one strategy of global MNCs, looking at, of course, the initiatives they've been taking recently, and because of its large population, rising middle class, increasing geopolitical heft, India definitely wants to elevate its position to be probably a global supply chain, a middleweight partner of choice, meaning not just N plus one or China plus one. They clearly want to have their own space carved out. Plus, of course, also due to the fact that they have a large consumer market in general.
So, overall, how does India's strategy in trying to reduce reliance on China compare with other countries?
I think still India depends on a lot of Chinese imports to manufacture, especially in sectors like pharma, electronics, and automotive. And when we talk to some of the manufacturing industry leaders in India, and generally they believe that I think this reliance is not going to go away at least for the next 10 years, meaning for India to develop its own upstream value chain, both domestically and also probably from other countries, it will take at least 10 years, and definitely in sectors like pharma and electronics. So apart from this, I think India has also taken several anti-dumping measures, especially in terms of tariff and non-tariff measures to protect its domestic manufacturing sector. Specifically, I think India has imposed about 46 different duties on 46 different items, and about 60% of those are targeting Chinese goods. So clearly, I think India is in a very similar, I would say, situation as many other countries. But in certain areas, India does not have much of a choice, at least for the next few years.
India is very much in line with the global trends. Countries like the European Union, the US, they've all been trying to slowly and gradually decouple from the Chinese supply chains. For example, the US has been reshoring its manufacturing units and, increasing the domestic production. They have also been offshoring to other countries like India, for example. Apple established its manufacturing facilities in India, and many other countries, China plus one, be it Vietnam or be it Indonesia. So India's strategy like that is very much in line with global trends. However, now the key difference here is that India is also now trying to balance its economic needs along with geopolitical realities. So India understands the fact that it has to depend on China at least for the next couple of years until its manufacturing ecosystem, I'm talking about the workforce skill development here, unless it's mature enough, we have to rely on the Chinese expertise, particularly because of the imports, Chinese imports that we have been doing at a very large scale.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights, Ravi and Naina.
Thank you so much. Thanks for patient listening.
Thank you.
Once again, those were Ravi Krishnaswamy, Frost and Sullivan, Senior Vice President for Advisory and Head of Energy Sustainability and Industrial Practice, and Dinah Bardwaj, International Business Advisor at Desanshira and Associates. For more news, visit manufacturing.asia.